Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with the one and only Mark Sleboda. We got a lot of things to talk about today. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're hanging out with the one and only Mark Sleboda. Mark, welcome back to our humble channel.
Garland, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Awesome. And by the way, let's not forget, everybody, boosty.to. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that's Mark's. It's boosty.to/the real politics, the real politique. Pardon me for such blasphemous comments. The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda, and we're going to explain to you everything you can do to, what's there, what's available for you, and how you can keep up with all of Mark's work. We're going to do that in a little bit, but right now we're going to start by getting into the conversation of what's happening. Here's something I wanted to throw at you, Mark. Here's the conversation amongst people who, a lot of people who are, very concerned about the special military operation, right? You've got a couple of different camps, not just two, but I'm going to address the two big ones. The one camp, that's the Garland Nixon camp. I've come up with two words for my camp. The key to success. You ready? Patience and partnerships, right? That Russia continues to strengthen their partnerships with the Russians, the Chinas, the Indias, etc., the Irans, maybe Venezuela, whoever. They continue to build and strengthen partnerships. And what is it? Beware the fury of a patient man. You don't have to respond every time Donald Trump wakes up on the wrong side of the bed and says, whatever, we're going to send, space stations this time and nuclear submarines and whatever, right? And every other day. And then, of course, there's a contingent that says, we got to act now. We got to fire everything we have. We got to swing, wildly at the adversaries. And to me, patience and partnerships. Your thoughts. And then there's some people that somewhere in between. One last thing I'll throw in this. Here's one thing I keep in mind. Russia maintains control of the escalations. If nobody has control and they spin out of control, you got nuclear war and everybody dies. And I think the Russians under the leadership, maybe the only ones that actually understand that. Anyway, I'm throwing all of that to you, Mark. Garland's a partnership and patience guy, but there are people that are saying we got to swing back and hit back now as quickly as possible, as hard as we can. That's the only language they understand. Mark Sleboda, where are you on that force continuum, shall we say?
I think there's a lot of well-meaning, people, shall we say, on the right side of history, who nonetheless are not fully understanding of either the complexity of the situation for Russia, that many of them have developed an inflated sense of Russia's military and geopolitical capabilities. And I think that the Kremlin is very conscious of the limits of their capabilities and of their geopolitical horizons. And I think that's a good thing. For instance, the US is not at all cognizant of those things. In fact, they are in full delusion of the limits of their capabilities, their geopolitical horizons, and are thus facing imperial, if you want to call it imperial hegemonic overstretch the world over. And, try to find the last time that they really won a war. I mean, sure, they can knock over governments, but, then controlling territory and governance is something, completely beyond their abilities, and their dreams of remaking the Middle East, which it seems every other U.S. president has, and so forth, have all come to absolute naught, other than chaos and destruction. Although there are those who say that there is certainly probably a segment within the deep state that are just fine with chaos and destruction because they manipulate it to their favor. But as for Russia in general, I don't agree that Russia is necessarily in charge of the escalations. They are completely responsive, or maybe even non-responsive to many of the escalations. Why? Because they're winning inside of a certain box, right? A certain parameters. They're winning on the battlefield in Ukraine. They're winning economically when you consider that the intent of the Western opponent was to crush their economy and to politically isolate Russia. Both of those things have failed, and Russia is winning on the battlefield. They're not winning fast enough for a lot of people. I don't know why they have the sense of urgency when the Russian government and the Russian people don't have this sense of urgency. I can only think that a lot of it is invested that this is a Western mindset that is, shall we say, constructed of the U.S.'s own quote unquote victories in Iraq and elsewhere, where they go in and remove the government, but then find themselves in a very bad situation after that. So I'm not so sure that those are good metrics. Also, perhaps, I don't know, a little too much Call of Duty. I'm just throwing that out there. So I myself, have a gut reaction, a heart reaction, whenever there is an escalation or an attempted escalation by the West. I feel it, as I'm sure many people do, but that doesn't mean that Russia has to respond to those provocations and escalations, because a lot of the intent to do so is to take them outside of that box where they're winning. They very much have resisted being dragged outside of that box into a greater escalation. And I think that part of the reason why the rest of the world outside of the West, the Indias, the Brazils, the Africas, have stayed so on side with Russia is because of the very patient, cautious, professional way that they have carried out this military operation, and the way they have always presented the Russian position diplomatically, i.e., we would prefer to settle this diplomatically. We're always there and available if you accept our terms. And we believe that our terms are rather reasonable, all things considered. Now, there certainly is a threat that by not responding to U.S. Western escalation, that only encourages the West to further escalations, right? It's true. I mean, that's an undeniable fact. They always read this as weakness, right? It's written into their mindset. They can't possibly understand the restraint or the logic of Russia not responding to those provocations in any other way. That doesn't mean that it is weakness. Now, again, Russia is very cognizant of the limits of their capabilities and doesn't want to get dragged outside of that box where they're winning this in their own time frame. But over time, I've become more comfortable with the fact that the U.S., the West in general, is simply not capable of any escalations that would really impact the SMO. I mean, other than just declaring total conventional war on Russia and moving their air assets, all of them from all over the world, to Europe and bringing them to bear in Ukraine, which is, let's be flat out, an impossibility, right? They cannot do that. They are an empire. They have too many requirements beyond Russia. And when we take a look at what they can deploy, I'm no longer even worried about a direct U.S. military intervention, although I certainly was at some point. And part of that is how, through Russia's own salami slicing tactics, a favorite U.S. tactic, by the way, or strategy, but through Russia's own very slow escalation of this conflict on their terms, the military inventories of the U.S. and the rest of NATO in several types of key munitions and equipment that they would need to engage, to escalate with Russia to a higher degree, are simply depleted. I mean, there's multiple of them, right? But the single most important is air defense interceptor missiles and the systems as well, and how poorly the Patriot has their premier air defense system has performed, both for, shall we say, the Saudis against the Yemen, the Houthis in Yemen for years leading into this conflict, and then the conflict here, and then also in the Middle East, right? In the attempts to utilize that to defend Israel from Iran. They first of all, they just have performance issues. There's not enough of the systems left. They've lost too many of them in Ukraine, and those systems have not performed well. And they're out of air defense interceptor missiles. How can you wage a war against anyone capable of long-range strikes at your forces or your country when you can't defend yourself against those long-range strikes anymore? And this is so important. It's so important to understanding why the war, the 12-day war between Israel and the US and Iran, began to go south for Israel, right? They gave Iran a good bloody nose in the beginning, but over time, their air defense was exhausted, and Russia and Iran's long-range strikes continued to come, and to do real, economic and potentially military damage to Israel, although they've tried to hide, I think, that to a great extent. And the U.S. had to come in and save Israel by dropping some bombs that we have increasing evidence was another pantomime attack agreed more or less beforehand with Iran. And then, as we saw during the Biden administration, and then both sides, agreed to a ceasefire, right? But why did they have to come in and do that? Why didn't they continue bombing Iran? Why didn't they go for regime change? Because they couldn't continue the conflict, because they didn't have the air defense interceptor missiles to continue it, right? They couldn't defend Israel. And Israel was becoming more and more, exposed, and they couldn't defend their own military forces in the Middle East. And that's why they had to get out. In fact, I was surprised when they started that conflict, because I'm like, they don't have enough air defense interceptor missiles for this. How are they doing this? And they didn't. They hoped for a quick regime change with intelligence, with covert ops and every decapitation strikes and the like in Tehran. It didn't go that way, and then they were in trouble. And that's why I have problems, or I have, shall we say, doubts about the U.S. ability to engage in a near-term round 2 against Iran, because they have not improved the situation. Their production rate of air defense interceptor missiles is still dirt low, and they're still continue to be expended in Ukraine and elsewhere. Raytheon's making 600 of them a year for the U.S., for Ukraine, for Israel, for all of the U.S. other vassals and allies and satellites that use the Patriot system, which is a lot. They don't have enough. It is an Achilles heel for the U.S. right now, and it is limiting their ability to wage war. Venezuela has limited air defense. They do actually have some older Russian S-300 systems, some other air defense systems, and a considerable number of Iglas manpads and the like, from my understanding. But even that, I believe, is making the U.S. hesitate. Again, because they would have to waste more. And it's not, of course, just the Patriot interceptor, the PAC-3 interceptor. It is the ATACMS, right? It is the SM, the Standard Missile 6. All of the, that's just why this, plaintive demand came out of the Pentagon to the military-industrial complex, telling them you have to double your production, or quadruple, even better, your production of these 12 key munitions. Why? Because the inventories are empty, and Russia is responsible for a lot of that. And the response from the military-industrial complex was, yes, that's great. Right. We'll be glad to take those orders. The only thing is you actually have to invest tens of billions of dollars beforehand so that we can do that. And otherwise we can't do it, right? That's what they said. We'd be happy to. You just have to invest tens of billions of dollars in building new factories and training up new people and developing supply chains for the components and everything else. And I don't see that the U.S. is even really capable of engaging in that type of strategic reforming of their military-industrial complex that would be necessary for that. So they're not in a good position, right? When you hear that Russia is outproducing the U.S. and NATO and the collective West in artillery shell production by 4 times, that should be ringing alarm bells. And we don't know the exact numbers, but it appears that Russia is also outproducing the U.S. by a very substantial margin in both long-range strike missiles and its own air defense missiles, which, by the way, are performing much better than the Patriot. and through all the different spectrums of their integrated, interconnected, multi-layered, right, short-range, medium, long-range air defense system and electronic warfare network, right? It's hands down best in the world. Iron Dome, it's a joke. We've seen that. We've seen Russia just over the last few days. There was 100-some drones on their way to Moscow. How many got through this time? 0. I didn't see one that got through. Now, I pay close attention to these things, and I do know that the Russian government, doesn't necessarily count those that get through. We shot down this many, and well, how many got through? And there's usually evidence that a handful usually get through, right? A rough oil refinery gets hit. This happens. It's an enormous country. You can't stop everything, but increasingly they're stopping so much. And the few that get through, they try to blow these oil refinery strikes out of all ridiculous proportion. These are extremely small warheads on these drones. And these oil refineries are already well-versed in isolation and fire control and all of these things. They just aren't doing much damage. So I worry less and less about a direct U.S. military intervention. And even more so because the Trump administration just doesn't seem politically disposed to it. And Macron's, rooster, cock of the walk posturing.
He got 2,000 soldiers now.
Yeah, 2,000. Russia has some 800,000 soldiers, just at least 800,000 combat soldiers in in the theater, right? In directly involved in the SMO, and the Wall Street Journal tells us that they've got some reserve, volunteer contract, fully trained armies, numbering over 250,000 in reserve that haven't even been deployed yet. And you want to give me a joke about 2,000 lightly armed French troops without any logistics, to properly keep? No, it's just a joke. It's if Macron does that, first of all, the only real use is a human tripwire to try to drag the U.S. in, and I don't think Trump actually cares that much about Macron. To be perfectly honest, right? Trump isn't on Russia's side, as a lot of people, for some reason, in the alt media have decided that he was. Right? He's the U.S. president, and they always seem to forget that fact, and that has limitations of what he's actually allowed to do and what he's capable of changing. But it also has demands, and defending a U.S. proxy regime in Kiev, trying to keep it alive by whatever means he can. Right now, it's trying to threaten a ceasefire and a freezing of the conflict, trying to force that on Russia or on Russia's allies to make them force it on Russia because they don't have any leverage left directly against Russia. I'm not that worried about it. And like I said, Macron and these other European midgets, I'm even less worried, right? One of the things that the course of this conflict has helped to make crystal clear for me is, the European countries aren't even paper tigers, because even on paper, they're dying old cats, right? Dying old fat tabby house cats, right? Even on paper, even by their own reports and their own assessments, their militaries have degraded, and they still have these delusions about their military strength, right? And you take away from the U.S., and the truth is they couldn't even take down Libya without the U.S. And they've only gotten worse since. So I don't fear these escalations so much anymore. There's a certain part of me that is a male, and I think there's testosterone and hormones that then honor and these things that on a gut level I feel a desire for a response, but when it comes to Putin and many of the other people in the Kremlin, they're not like you and me, Garland, and the people out there listening. Ice water runs in their veins, right? They're not subject to the same emotional responses that the rest of us are. And thank all the gods and goddesses that they aren't, because otherwise we could have been in potential, nuclear escalatory situations many times before this, through this conflict and other, even before this. So I'm fully on board with the patience and partnership. Again, now that doesn't mean I don't feel, a gut reaction to demanding something, but I usually, walk it off, go walk the dogs, do something else for a while and let myself calm down, right? And it's I continually, just through my own proclivities, am absolutely stuck on sci-fi analogies, but Star Wars: A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie, and you see these X-wing and Y-wing pilots coming down the trenches of the Death Star, and they're aiming for that that one little womp rat size thing that they have to get the whatever laser or missile, whatever it is they're actually firing through, and they're being shot at by air defense cannons, and there's TIE fighters coming in and out, and that commander of that squadron is just there, stay on target, stay on target. And that is the mantra. And all of these cries for urgency and response and all of these other things, they're starting to become, to me, background noise, almost like the Kiev regime and its proponents, constant noise about how they're still winning, right? Of course, the others are a lot more aligned with us, of course. I just have to roll my eyes when I see what is happening in Pokrovsk, when I see what is happening in Kupiansk and Liman and Seversk, and I see the Kiev regime's entire line of fortifications on the front line are collapsing, even though they've invested the entire fighting force of their military. It's not like they have anything in reserve. They're to the wire now. They've spent everything. They after these cities fall, they're not really going to be able to defend anything to the same extent. Now, it doesn't mean Russia's going to run over Ukraine in a couple of weeks. It's a big country, and they still have to fight town by town, building by building. But already, the writing is on the wall. It's just for the West, it's only just a matter of how much they can make Russia, how high of a cost they can make Russia pay in achieving the victory. What that final victory looks like, and I know that the Kremlin doesn't want to take Kiev, doesn't want to take West Ukraine, doesn't want to do that. I don't think they're going to have any choice in the end, though. I think the West is going to, there's never going to be papers signed that accept Russia's terms or any, there's not going to be any Treaty of Westphalia in 2026 or, anything like that. Nothing like that is going to happen. It's going to be more like Syria, where they just keep hoping for a black swan event, no matter what happens on the battlefield, that will turn things in the end in their favor, which doesn't mean that it will turn out like Syria, but that's they will hope and count on that, because they cannot accept politically, geopolitically, mentally, even their own conception of themselves, their place in the world, and the way the world works. They can't accept a Russian victory, so they will deny it. They will refuse it. They will not surrender. They will not capitulate. They will not cut a deal on anything but their own terms. They can't, and that will compel Russia to go eventually all the way, and that may take some time yet. No matter how sorry a state, but more and more, I see that the West is less and less capable even of raising the costs for Russia. I see reports from the Kiel Institute and other studies that have been done in Europe, right? Their own universities. We can't help that there's a big drop off in the amount of military aid and financial aid that is being supplied to the Kiev regime in Ukraine. And they're doing their best, right? Part of it, yes, Trump is not sending any new arms packets. Yes. And part of that is simply because the Pentagon doesn't have that much left to give that they can actually make use of. So, yes, it is a political decision, but it's a political position also, I believe, largely to a large degree based on the fact that they simply don't have anything left to give anyway. And they can't admit that, of course. But we've seen the Pentagon say, we need these more missiles. We're out of this. We're out of the PAC-3. We're out of the ATACMS. We're out of this. We need to make more. And they're screaming it. And I think the Kremlin understands all of it. I mean, they keep track of these things far better than we do. So they have access to intelligence and a lot more information. So they must have an indication of what a weak military and escalation card that the U.S. has. Am I scared of the Tomahawks? Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. I mean, Russia, am I scared of 150 or 200 or even 300 Taurus missiles? No, right? And then what? They don't have anything else. They don't. not that can be provided to Ukraine, and even what they have that couldn't be provided to Ukraine, right? I'm not that afraid of it. I see what the Russian military is capable of methodically adapting to and grinding its way through, and I'm pretty confident. And yes, they're doing it at their own slow pace, and a lot of people simply don't understand because the Western propagandist tells us the exact opposite. But Russian casualties are, in relative terms for the scale of this conflict, exceedingly low, and they want to keep them that way, right? Because all of Russian society, 80% is behind the SMO, and they still getting 40 to 50,000 new volunteers a month for the SMO, right? And the Russian military, as a result, is gaining size every month because the rate at which they're losing troops is a fraction of the amount that they're gaining every month. Another concern that Westerners simply won't understand, and having immigrated here and having my wife from Crimea and having family in Donbass and Kharkov and Odessa, I can tell you that there is a sincere desire, not just in the Kremlin, but in Russians in general, to minimize civilian casualties on the Ukrainian side, right? There is a certain segment, certainly, of Ukrainians, right? Those who the Banderites, those who believe in the regime, those who are genuinely pro-Western liberal, so on, that hate Russians. It's really hard to find a Russian that hates Ukrainians. It's just not in their mental framework. They're just our brother people, our sister people that have gone astray. They've become infected with something and they need to be helped. That's the way Russia looks at it. That's the way Russians look at it. I believe that's the way even most of the Russian military that I've heard looked at it, right? Even when, their friends and brothers, their comrades in arms are dying next to them, they still don't develop a sense of national hatred against Ukrainians, right? There's an occasional, word, derogatory towards the enemy, but always it's not applied to the entirety of Ukrainians. They believe that Ukrainian society has become sick since the 90s and they need some medicine. That's the way they look at it. So they're not only is there a continued desire to minimize Russian casualties, but there is a desire to minimize Ukrainian civilian casualties. And does that mean that Russia then suffers some civilian casualties? Yeah, it does, right? Again, we see a residential building hit by a drone and stuff. But in relative terms, even the Russian civilian casualties are very light. And yes, you can make the argument that nothing is worth the death of one Russian. Okay, that's not real politics, right? That's not realist, right? The Russian government is doing everything it can to protect as many of its own people, but it has its eyes on a wider regional, but also a global horizon. And they talk all of this over with the Chinese, I'm quite sure. And as long as they have the backing of the Chinese, and even better, as they continue to have the backing of the Indians, that's icing on the cake. They're very confident, right, in where they are. That doesn't mean I agree with everything that they do. This latest thing of bringing journalists into Pokrovsk and Kupiansk for some type of theater to rub it in the Kiev regime's face and try to make them admit that they're losing. And I don't think I'm like, what are you talking, a ceasefire or slowing the combat? No, that I don't agree with.
I kind of like it. I kind of like that.
Okay, I don't. I think it's. I almost think it's distasteful.
Well, I think it's a little something different. Okay. You know, I thought that as soon as they said, okay, these troops are surrounded, and the Ukrainians said, no, they're not. They're not surrounded. That's just propaganda, right?
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I believe the Russians are probably surrounded. I said, but yeah, we do know that governments do use propaganda and misleading statements. So who knows? They're probably surrounded, but it's possible they're not. I don't know for sure, but I think the likelihood is that they are
They're
surrounded.
surrounded.
So there was,
They're surrounded.
anytime there's any war, you have to say to your mind, even if it's 10%, there is a possibility that this is a game. Okay. And as soon as the Russians said, now, if you want to come in and take a look at it and talk to the guys, feel free. I said, they're surrounded. So that's what it did. Even though nobody will probably go in. I mean, let's face it, I wouldn't. If they said, hey, Garland, you're a journalist, you can go in and check it out. Dad, how about I'll stay out of the cauldron? I'll call them. I'll do a long distance. But at that point, Wakash here looked at it and said, I think that's pretty. Anytime you're saying you'll let the press come in and talk to them, that was the final confirmation for me. You know what I'm saying? That's why I'm saying I can see strategically from a public relations perspective, it was enough to convince me from 90% to 100%. And what do they care whether I think or not? I don't know, but that's the way I saw it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could make the argument that they know that the Kiev regime will never accept this, right? And indeed, they're not. And there are a number of international journalists who have, said, "All right, we'll go in, we'll do this."
Yeah,
and the Kiev regime is furious and is screaming at them that they'll be violating international Ukrainian law and international law, and the Ukraine will come down on them and their media outlets and everything, and which is, of course, is just making Putin's point. And you could make the argument that Putin made this offer with the understanding that the Kiev regime would never accept it or allow it to be accepted by journalists. There is that, but I would be okay with that. But has the Russian military slowed down its finishing of the situation in these places? If they have, then it would be one of the first times in this conflict where political concerns have been elevated over military contingency. And you can say that there's a political ploy here, right?
Maybe.
You would be right. They're hoping that it does, cohesion damage to the Kiev regime, right? It helps their implosion, the lack of their own population's belief in everything they say, the lack of Western countries' belief in anything they say, right? All of that. But still, it is one of the few times since the first year of this conflict that I can say that Russia is putting a political priority over a military priority. And
maybe. What about this? What happens if they say, I'll put it like this. I've seen football. My buddy played football. My best friend played college and pro football. And we'd be watching game, and I'd like, that was a stupid timeout at the end of the game. And he'd say, no, it wasn't. I'd say, why? He'd say, the big defensive linemen are tired as hell. And they're trying to, or, some guy fell down and faked an injury. So the refs would stop the game for a second. And he's like, man, those 325, 330-pound guys are like, we need a couple minutes for a breather, right? And so it appears like strategically it's a bad decision, but they need a breather for the last 5 minutes of the game. Here's my point. It could be as simple as the people in the field, the general saying, look, we've moved, we've done this, but we need to move some troops around. We need to bring some people in. Can you give us about a week? Yeah. Don't worry. Here's the plan. I'll just say that. I don't know, but you never know what's going on under the.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And more than that, right? The longer that the Kiev regime forces, in the encirclement have to sit there without resupply, without ammunition, without food, without water, without anything, that worsens their defensive capability. There is that, right? On the other hand, it does give the Kiev regime more time to draw forces for counterattacks to try to break the encirclement, right? So it's,
and weaken another area.
Yeah.
The rob Peter to pay Paul. I can make arguments.
Yeah, we can make an argument, right? I'm not, I don't think anyone outside is fully capable of assessing everything that the way that the military and the Kremlin was. So my criticism of the Kremlin here is, I would say, qualified, based on if this is true or this is not true. And if the military is saying, yeah, we would benefit from, a few days to tighten this noose before we finish it, then that's fine. That's the military assessment. And if they're going to play a political game during that time, a PR game, if they're effectively trolling the Kiev regime big time, right? I'm okay with that, right? But I would want to make sure that it is the military that is really okay with it, not a political decision. And of course, we're never going to find that out. I mean, no one's ever going to tell us the reality of that. But
all right, so let's go to other very important strategic things. The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. You can find that at boosty.to. Mark, tell everyone what they can find. We got a lot of Mark Sleboda fans. We got 1,258 people watching right now, and all 1,258 people should become subscribers. Very simple. At any rate, Mark, talk about the Real Politic at boosty.to and what people can find there and why they may be interested.
Yeah, so I'm a Russian citizen living in Russia, so I'm subject to all your Western country sanctions, right? And so the normal monetization, Patreon, Substack, YouTube, buy me a coffee, none of it works for me. Boosty, however, is sanctions proof, right? It is good for you. It is good for me, right? And that's why I've set up shop there. It's like Patreon, except sanctions proof. And what I do there is I collate everything from all the interviews I do with Garland and Garland and any other people that I happen to do an interview with, but mostly Garland. But I also do a lot of exclusive content there. I do 3 different pieces of exclusive content: an in focus video, a question and answer where I answer your questions, and a weekend review every week. And it ends up being something ridiculous, like 5 hours of exclusive content a week. So if you want to punish yourself with hearing more of my cynicism and fatalism, well, this is the place for it. Check me out there. You're free to come and sign up. You won't get access to the exclusive content, but you'll get everything else that's there. And if you sign up, then you get that. Plus, you get a private Discord channel where we can discuss and debate things without all the NAFO bots and trolls and spam bots and adverts and everything like that. And you can use, the channels, the voice channels, the video channels. Discord's great that way.
All right. Something else I wanted to hit on, and that is one of the things that's been going around, this Venezuela stuff. Now, I understand something, and people have to understand that Venezuela is a long ways from Russia and China and even Iran, that they have, over the course of time, provided some things for Venezuela. But these countries, Russia, China, Iran, are not built to project power in the same way that the U.S. empire is, which is why they're not up to their ears in $38 trillion in debt right now. But apparently, there's been reports of some IL-76 landing. There's reports of Wagner. I don't know how much Russia can do to help Venezuela, but Venezuela, I mean, they got a lot of advantages. It's a huge country, jungles and mountains. It's inhospitable terrain, a very revolutionary spirit there. The people are willing to fight and armed by the government. Have you heard anything about these rumors of Wagner and IL-76s and things of that nature, Mark?
I've heard all the same rumors, right? I can't confirm any of it, right? It's all on the Telegram channels, right? It's not official Russian government, but I believe that some of it is almost certainly true, right? And how much of it I don't know. How much Russia and China can do. Here's the problem. One of the arguments that is being precisely made by the people within the administration is that they need to regime change Venezuela because it's getting too close to Russia and China. And the threat that Russia may do something like station some Oreshniks in Venezuela. So if Russia and China provide too much help, then they may be providing exactly the justification and the excuse that the U.S. needs. It's a weighing of the situation that we may not be qualified. You have to consider that Russia and China providing more help probably wouldn't stop the U.S. if they were really intent at regime change at all costs. But Russia and Chinese help, more direct help might be the thing that impels the U.S. to do something that they might have not done before, or so on. I believe that the U.S. Trump doesn't want a major land invasion of Venezuela here. He knows all the problems with this, right? He's putting the CIA and the pro-U.S. opposition in Venezuela to work, right? They want to do most of this covert. They want to fold the Venezuelan government and military like they did in Syria, right? Where they get all the generals and the commanding officers and the local political officials to all, they co-opt them, they bribe them, they blackmail them, they do whatever is like they tried to do in Iran and was fully exposed, right? They call them up and tell the general, we'll kill your kids if we know where they are if you don't do this, right? The CIA is really good at this, right? They did it in Iraq in 2003. They did it in Libya at the end. They did it in Syria. They tried to do it to less effect in Iran, but they're really good at this. This is what they want to do. And they're willing to do things like decapitation strikes with tomahawks or something to assist that. And maybe even putting a few thousand Marines and special forces on the ground to secure things if they're able to get a real decapitation strike. But if they're not able to get that, right, then things, it just becomes a military pressure campaign. And more when I see these bomber flights that, these mock bombings, these practice bombing drills that they're doing, they're trying to politically pressure the government, right? They made it clear, right? We've heard it multiple times. They want Maduro to flee Venezuela, to go to Russia or China, Venezuela's allies, where he belongs, right? That's not in the Western Hemisphere, which Monroe Doctrine is U.S. territory. That's the way that they're looking at this. So Russia and China have to be very careful in their own, attempts to help Venezuela here, that they don't provoke something, and again, if they did, there's nothing that Russia and China are going to be able to do power projection wise to stop from the U.S. if they're really intent at taking Venezuela at all costs. And Russia and China don't want to give them the excuse for this. But if they attempt another largely covert and asymmetric warfare regime change and it fails, well, then the U.S. will have more egg on their face. So,
yeah, I see that. I see that as a really bad move as a person who has extensive experience in Venezuela. Here's what they don't understand. It's that Putin is a bad guy, and all we have to do is get Putin out of power, and all the Russians will then say, yes, we want to join Victoria Nuland and the neocons and hand everything up. You know what I mean? Hand everything over to Wall Street, this idea. They don't even understand what Maduro is. Maduro's in charge. He's a dictator if we get him out of power. Maduro is nothing but a symbol. He's a symbolic leader. The people love him as a symbol of Hugo Chavez. They literally call themselves the Chavistas, right? And why do they love Maduro? He was Chavez's right-hand man. That's it. That's why they love. Yeah, what about Maduro? Hey, Chavez is effectively like a political saint in Venezuela. Why is he a political saint? Because the U.S. and the West was stealing everything they had. We're maintaining the minority wealthy Spaniards, tiny little Spaniard minority in power that's handing everything over, and the rest of the people are hungry and starving and living terrible. In comes Chavez, who changes all of that, Holy moly, the majorities love Chavez, and they call themselves to this day the Chavistas, and they say literally, we are the sons and daughters of Chavez. We are the Chavistas. If you, let's say you blow up Maduro, that's just going to piss him off. Oh, you're going to get it now. You have blown up the symbol of our great and wonderful hero. And by the way, Chavez he did a lot of things, not the least of which being is he really educated the people, but not just way out in the villages and the towns and the mountains and all over. He didn't just educate them to get rid of their to read and write and all that kind of stuff. He gave them a historical and political education, and they are more politically knowledgeable than the people of the United States, which isn't hard, I might add. So you go there and you talk and you're like, my God, these people know history. I mean, the poorest people out in the mountainous, small little towns are very, very knowledgeable and ready to fight. Not ready to fight for Maduro. Their exact words are this: we will defend our democracy. They identify with the Bolivarian revolution. They got pictures of Simone Bolivar. We must fight and defend ourselves from these evil Europeans, right? So this is not about Maduro. This is even not about just yesterday or last week. This is a view of the Bolivarian revolution of whatever year that was in, a continue of it, and that revolution has to continue, and we have to fight these Europeans. They're always going to be on our back, but doggone it, if they come here, they're going to get it. So it's a fundamental misunderstanding to think that somehow they can kill Maduro, or that Chavez converted the military academies so that the Chavistas are the generals. The Chavistas are running the military and controlling the military. So if you come in there and say, we'd like to buy you out, you're getting the most diehard Chavistas who are in charge of the military. They've been trying this for years, but they can't, because Hugo Chavez was far ahead of them. The only thing they can do is, if they step into that country, woe be to the soldiers that go in there, because they're going to get shot at from every tree, every corner, everything, by every man, woman, and child who are armed. Good.
I have seen videos of this Maria Corina Machado woman, this U.S. the new Juan Guaido, walk by military troops and try to shake their hand, and they refuse to even look at her. So I hope that what you're saying is true. I haven't been on the ground like you have, so I have no way of assessing how much the Bolivarian, revolution has ideologically captured the majority of Venezuelan citizens. If that's true, then the U.S. will be walking into a quagmire in a situation that they can't regime change, much like Iran, right? Like Iran, they underestimated the Iranian peoples rallying around the flag, rallying around the regime, even those that maybe don't even like the regime, right? So, and I don't know the strength of the middle class and bourgeois opposition in Venezuela. I know there have been large protests and essentially a street war, a guerrilla war for years, but that seems to have died down in recent years to a large degree.
There are factions amongst the opposition. Okay. Yeah. I would argue the smallest faction of the opposition are the Guaido faction, the ones that are just like Maria Machado, whatever her name is, right? But I met with people when I was there. We met with people from the opposition forces, and there was a significant portion of the opposition forces that are basically saying, we just want to do this thing normally. We believe we can convince people. We want to run in the elections. We're upset because we don't want outside entities coming in, overthrowing Venezuela. We don't like the sanctions because they're hurting us too. So you have a portion of the opposition that says we're perfectly comfortable working within the democratic structure here to try to maintain political power. So even the opposition is fractured, and I would argue it is by far the most well-funded part of the opposition, the U.S. puppetry, but they're not even the largest part of the opposition party. So it's the bottom line is the rhetoric that they're giving us does not match. First of all, Didn't they tell us? Well, as soon as we go into Ukraine and we're going to throw some sanctions, and then all of the Russians will gather around and they'll grab Putin, they'll burn him in effigy in the streets of Moscow, and then he's gone, and then they'll just hand everything over. And that's always the same story. Oh boy, the house of cards in Iran, they'll just fall when we go in there. Well, really? So that over and over and over, and it's always the opposite. And this is probably one of the worst miscalculations, if not the worst miscalculation that they will make in that realm, Mark. Not a good idea, but we shall see. And one thing we got to add, you always have to add this, and I don't feel good about it, but it's reality, cold calculations of international politics. If the United States draws themselves into another quagmire, it greatly weakens the empire again. Sure. You know what I mean? Another quagmire in South America, and it will politically weaken the empire, because Americans do not like or accept body bags coming home. You let one of them ships get hit by a missile and go to the bottom with 300 sailors, or a bunch of guys go ashore into the jungles and come back snake bitten full of holes. This place will go to pieces.
There's no bigger beneficiaries of the conflict in Ukraine and it continuing on than China and Iran, right? Because the U.S. is exhausting itself and its potential there, and the Europeans. And if they do get involved in Venezuela and their assumptions, and their ability to covert regime change do not work, then they'll be walking into the same thing, and it's, it will hurt them and their abilities to wage war against Russia and China and Iran and other countries in the long term. They only have so many resources. They seem to have identified Venezuela as the low-hanging fruit compared to Iran and Russia and China. But if it's not as low-hanging as they seem to think it is, and they have made those mistakes before, right, then it could be a very bad situation and have wider geopolitical weakening consequences for them, against, and hasten the multipolar world there. It would mean suffering for the Venezuelan people that we don't want, but, that's, someone is going to suffer. The hegemon's just not going to give up. So the only thing is, there are plenty of situations where these assumptions, Russia, China, Iran, have proven false. And then there's a handful of situations like Syria, where the government was hollowed out enough by sanctions and so forth that it all fell with a little bit of covert push very highly. And we just have to hope that, as you, with experience on the ground, say that Venezuela is more on, the Iran end of the spectrum than the Syria end of the, political stability spectrum.
Far further, more so than Iran. Far more than Iran. Because the Iranian government, my understanding is they had about 43% support. Okay. The Maduro government has in the low 60s, and another, say, 10% or so who think he's too far to the right. They're the actual Communist Party, and they think he's too soft. So by the time you finish, you're going to get the majority of the country. Now, those are going to be the ones ready to fight the most, but everybody is. It'd be a very, very bad move, but we shall see, Mark. And the other part of it is this. Here's what I'd say about Syria. The old "we shall see," the old Zen story, where the farmer and his horse runs away, and all of his neighbors come over and they say, "Oh man, that's rough. You lost your horse. I don't know how you're going to farm." He said, "Yeah, we'll see. Maybe." Next day, the horse comes back and he's got 7 wild horses. They run into the fence, and the neighbors say, "Hey, wow, you're really fortunate. You got all these horses. You can sell some. You'll be rich. This is great." And he goes, "Yeah, maybe we'll see." Next day, his son's breaking some of the new horses, falls off, breaks both of his legs, and his neighbors come over. "Oh man, that's rough. I mean, how are you going to work your farm? That's bad stuff." And he goes, "Maybe we'll see." Next day, the military comes. "We're going to war with the Mongols. Everybody, oh, your son, where's your son? He has to go to war." And farmer goes, "He's right in there." They look, they go, "Oh my God, he's got 2 broken legs. Okay, we'll leave him." The next day, the neighbors come over. "Man, you made out good. Your son doesn't have to go to war. That's great. You sure are lucky." He said, "We'll see." My point being, everybody's looking at Syria saying they won, they got it made. And we're starting to see like this opposition starting to grow. I don't know who's arming them, perhaps Iran or somebody. They're starting to be armed. Talk to me in 5 years and tell me that they won in Syria. That's my thing. Talk to me in 5 years and say, boy, they sure won in Syria. I don't think that's going to be the answer in the long run. They got their hands on something, you know, and I don't think it's going to work out for them. But in the short run, if you're America and everything's the next quarter you won, if you're Iran, that's 2,000 or 3,000 years old, if you're Russia, it's 1,000 or so, if you're China, that's 5,000 years old, you just sit back and say, all right, you got a couple punches in. 5, 10, 15 years from now, let's look back and see if that's a win or not, because they operate on a different time scale. And so anyway, you get my point, Mark.
Absolutely. There was a recent interview that the Chinese analyst Victor Gao did, where with the Western media, where they're like, but you'll lose the U.S. market, and he's like, we don't care. He literally said, we don't care. You know, civilization states, right? And he's talking Russia, China, and Iran there, right? You know, have been around for hundreds or thousands of years. China was here 5,000 years before the United States and will be here 5,000 years after the U.S. is gone too. And there we go.
Exactly. Everybody, one last time, don't forget, this is the great Mark Sleboda. Oops. And you can find all of his work at The Real Politique. That's boosty.to/The Real Politique. Go there, check it out. Hopefully you'll feel obliged and obligated to become a subscriber. Certainly there's an opportunity to donate also, so you can help keep Mark, give Mark the opportunity to continue his fine work. Thanks a lot, Mark. And I really look forward to seeing you again soon. And hopefully, if my visa stuff gets done.
Buy this man a coffee because he's coming to Moscow and he needs some vodka money.
Yeah, and coffee's expensive in Moscow. So.
It is actually, yeah, it is kind of expensive.
There we go. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. Share this on all your social media platforms. We're out. Oops, I almost clicked on the wrong thing. We're not. Now we're out.